Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the microdose podcast, giving you everything you need to know about the day to come on the election campaign trail.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me, as always, Sam Coates of Sky News. It is day 37 of the election campaign, and there are now just 6 days to go until polling day. And Sam, it feels like we are into the final straight now. This is the final weekend ahead of campaigning. We get a few more days of the final messages last week, and we are there. Are you going to crawl over the finish line, or are you going to sprint over it in excitement?
I think everyone takes a deep breath today, and then what happens in the sort of final 72 hours is that leaders sprint around the country as they make their closing arguments, and we sprint around the country after them, and then we hit election day, where I have to say there is no politics in Jack and Sam's on election day itself, because you can't really talk about politics on the big day. And then it goes back to being utterly insane as we maybe or maybe not get a new government and things tumble down. So we're going to run faster and faster and faster and faster from today.
That is a spirit. 3 big things for you today. It is basically the final weekend. We'll be talking through what the different leaders are doing today and what the different parties have planned over the weekend, including some mass rallies we hear, both from Reform and from the Labour Party. We'll be talking about Reform as well, who are very much in the headlines this morning after Channel 4 News expose on some of their candidates in Clacton, or some of their campaigners, I should say, in Clacton last night. Reform getting more and more scrutiny, and Nigel Farage himself will be on BBC Primetime this evening to answer questions about all of that. And we better talk about the international stage as well, Sam, because that debate last night between Donald Trump and Joe Biden overshadows everything now. Then, of course, we've seen this drama in Europe over the probable return of Ursula von der Leyen, and we're getting the first round of the French presidential elections this weekend. So there is millions of things going on around the world that will shape the future for whomever comes into Downing Street after the election next week. So tons to get into. Let's kick off with the final weekend of campaigning here. Keir Starmer doesn't seem to be doing lots of things today, but Rishi Sunak certainly is. He's out and about in the north of England talking to people, and there's lots of action from the smaller parties today, Sam, which I think is interesting given those vote share projections showing that fewer and fewer people seem to be wanting to support either Labour or the Tories, and we're seeing this surge in support not just for Reform but for Lib Dems as well. Important to keep remembering that, and also for the Green Party. We have this debate tonight on BBC One where Nigel Farage, leader of Reform, and one of the Greens co-leaders, Adrian Ramsey, they of course have two, are both on this BBC Question Time special at 8 p.m. Crucially, Sam, and you'll know this better than anyone, there is no football tonight, which means that people will have little option but to tune in and watch Nigel and Adrian take on a BBC Question Time audience.
We'll come on to that in just a second. It's interesting, this phase of the campaign, because the parties are still churning out their press releases, but I can see almost no sign that the principal audience for them, which is the newspapers, are paying any attention. So overnight, Labour pumped out information about mortgages, and they have new analysis suggesting that for families remortgaging, their monthly rate payments have increased by £221 for those who've remortgaged following the mini budget. Nothing that I can see in the papers reflects that. For the Tories, they say they're launching their education plan. Frankly, they're just repeating it and dressing it up in slightly different language. Stuff about, expansion about childcare. Again, nothing, barely scratches the sides. The Liberal Democrats are re-announcing their plan to scrap VAT on children's toothpastes. We're just not at a point where mid-level policy is making any difference. It is only the very biggest things that are scratching the surface.
And of course, Sam, the story that won't go away for the Tories remains Gamblegate. We saw Rishi Sunak asked by the Telegraph if any other cabinet ministers might have put bets on the election. He has studiously not answered that question. We're assuming not, but goodness knows at this point in this story where it goes next. And of course, report by your colleague John Craig at Sky News that the number 10 Chief of Staff Liam Booth-Smith has been interviewed as a witness, to be clear, as part of this investigation. He is really Rishi Sunak's pretty much his closest aide, right, or one of his 2 or 3 very closest aides, which shows just how close this story has now got to the Prime Minister, Sam.
I mean, there's no doubt it's making him grumpy. I did see him yesterday, and we had a probably somewhat tetchy encounter. I was pressing him on whether or not he had told Craig Williams, his other very close aide under investigation, about the timing of the election before he put on the bet, and he refused to say, suggesting he can't. I was suggesting that it's entirely possible to answer questions about it because there is no criminal trial and jury to influence. It is impossible for him to prejudice an investigation process. That's just simply not a thing in law, whatever the Gambling Commission might say. The big problem right now is that the Met Police yesterday expanded the scope of their investigation. Until yesterday, only the Gambling Commission was looking at candidates and what they'd done. But there is now a chance, or there is now a belief, that there is a need to investigate whether or not candidates, particularly Tory candidates, have engaged in misconduct in public office by using the information that they have. And the Gambling Commission cannot investigate that. And so very reluctantly, Scotland Yard have had to get involved. And that could mean that we get candidates interviewed under caution, maybe even this side of Election Day, which is just all the worst possible kind of conclusion. It's just sort of in some ways a fitting end to the box set of this administration, but is definitely not the kind of the kind of closing scenes that Rishi Sunak and the Tories want to see played out.
No, the closing scenes we'll see this weekend appear to be some big rallies happening in various parts of the country. Reform are talking about having thousands of people at a rally in Birmingham on Sunday. Labour are planning some big event in London on Saturday for supporters with celebrities and music and all sorts of stuff, according to Playbook, which is is that the look you want a few days before an election campaign? They're insisting it's nothing like that famous Sheffield rally with Neil Kinnock back in 1992, but it's hard to imagine those comparisons won't be drawn. And actually, I should take the opportunity to plug our Ace Westminster Insider podcast, which is out from Politico today, which looks at the final days of a campaign and some of the things that can go right and wrong in this crucial moment, because, of course, this is the moment when lots of the public start to tune in, Sam, and actually pay attention to the stuff that you and I have been banging on and on and on about for the past few weeks. And so suddenly you can see shifts in the polls in those final days, because suddenly people who've been saying, I don't know, actually start to pay attention and go, yes, I'm going to vote for X or Y. And that's why campaigns put so much time and effort and, crucially, money into the campaigning that they will do this weekend and all of next week. I always remember that the campaign in 2015, Sam, I'm sure you do too, where David Cameron suddenly started jetting off to the southwest every single day and was campaigning very, very hard down there and basically winning the election down there, which none of us lobby hacks quite appreciated was happening at the time. But you can do those sorts of things in the final days, and it'll be very interesting to see where the party leaders decide to put themselves over the next few days and where you start to see the resources of party campaigns heading in.
I think by the day before polling day, I'd expect, for instance, Keir Starmer to go on a three-nation tour, England, Scotland and Wales. It's that kind of dash showing energy.
There's always a three-nation tour. That's right, yeah. There's helicopters and planes and popping up on remote Scottish islands and showing you're trying to govern in every part of the country. All that sort
24 hours to save your election slogan.
Exactly. Let's talk about a little bit about reform, because Nigel Farage had a wonderful first few weeks of the campaign once he decided to enter it, or first couple of weeks probably, surging in the polls. Scenes of him, swilling pints in the pub in Clacton with hundreds of supporters surrounding him and generally giving off a very jolly mood. Now that the campaigns have recalibrated around the fact that Reform are a major player in this election, they're starting to hone their attack lines, and they think they've found a weakness in Nigel Farage's armour, which is his position on Ukraine, which is, every poll will tell you, not a popular one. For a populist to be not popular on something is an unusual policy position, but Nigel Farage is very much not going with the public mood on Ukraine. He's giving far more Putin-friendly answers, as his opponents are keen to frame it, than other politicians would dream of giving, and he is getting hammered for it by the Tories in particular, but also by the other parties. And there is some suggestion that it is cutting through with the public. And then that is combined with this report we saw on Channel 4 News last night, who went undercover with some Reform campaigners and filmed them saying the most appalling things And then that is being, splayed out across the TV news last night and will continue to be shown today. And that sort of stuff does resonate with people because it's a very visual representation of the very worst side of reform that their opponents are very keen to talk about. And you just wonder, is it possible that the reform vote will start to get squeezed in the last few days? There is this phenomenon that we've often seen in past elections that smaller parties do get squeezed in the last few days as people start to make their minds up and think, do you know what, it really is a choice between that guy to be Prime Minister or that guy to be Prime Minister, and start to see voting for a smaller party as a wasted vote. It's something that the Lib Dems have always complained about and worried about, and it's certainly something that Reform are concerned about. So those two things or three things combined of more scrutiny for Farage, the gaffes from campaigners starting to show up, and that squeeze might just start to cause him to sweat a little bit tonight when he's popping up on Question Time.
We've had re-crossover moments. So we had the moment where Reform overtook the Tories. Now, certainly in the latest YouGov, Reform are now once again beneath the Conservatives. And it's not all hard-hitting news interviews, though, for Farage. He's also on Loose Women at 12:30, which it is not a walk in the park. I mean, that could be quite tough, but it's a different style of interview to the ones that have caused him particular problems so far. But let's see about that. Interesting that you're talking about Nigel Farage's view of Ukraine, unpopular with the British public, but that's the second time I've heard similar views expressed by a prominent political leader. The other one was in the early hours of this morning in the debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And the one person that Donald Trump seemed to be in sympathy with is Nigel Farage when it comes to Ukraine. Donald Trump using the line that every time President Zelensky comes to the US, he walks out again with tens and tens or hundreds of millions of dollars worth of aid. He said, I don't blame Zelensky. He's a fantastic negotiator. I blame domestic politicians, and pointed the finger at Joe Biden. So there's a sympathy, a synthesis between Nigel Farage and Donald Trump on that critical issue. Jack, were you paying attention to what happened in the US in the early hours this morning?
I certainly was paying attention, yes. The debate is already being seen as one of the most potentially consequential presidential debates there's ever been in America. Absolutely everybody seems to agree on what happened, which is that it was a catastrophe for Joe Biden last night. His performance was, by all accounts,
it was a difficult
abysmal.
Watch. It was a difficult
stuttering
watch.
Stumbling,
his eyes,
and all the things they say about him, Sam, all the things they say about the president were writ large on people's screens. It was filmed. The clips will be shown over and over again. He wasn't coherent in parts of the debate, and Trump, gave the best performance that he can. He gave the best version of himself. He didn't shout and interrupt. He was hectoring, but not in a way that will have deeply upset people like he sometimes is. And it was all the attention was on Biden. And we were getting emails from our huge DC newsroom we have there. Our global editor-in-chief, John Harris, has emailed in to say that the possibility of a second Trump term has never looked more plausible. That the Democrats are melting down over this today, Sam. There are people talking about, is it too late to get Biden out of the campaign? Is it too late to parachute somebody else in? There are plenty of Democrats who now think he cannot win on the basis of that performance last night. It's hard to overstate how important that is. And, in the frame of British politics, whoever wins the election next week is obviously going to have to deal with this American president for the next 4 years. And if it's Donald Trump, things are not going to be normal.
There was one point where Joe Biden actually just stopped talking and your stomach kind of churned. And those things, as well as the detail of the arguments, I think could have quite a big effect.
I think you're understating a colossal effect. And of course, the backdrop for this, there is a French election that happens this Sunday. There's two parts to a French election. So the first bit's this Sunday and the second bit's next Sunday, where the far right are expected to do extremely well, if not get their first French prime minister, Jordan Bardella, if things go as is currently expected. So, then the backdrop for Emmanuel Macron is obviously intensely difficult. And again, you have this next prime minister coming in, dealing with potentially, a rising far right in France, and Donald Trump in the White House. I mean, what an impossible job for any British Prime Minister to try and handle that whilst dealing with all of the domestic problems that we've been talking about that neither of the parties have addressed yet as well. Does anyone even want this job? I mean, I can't think of anything worse.
The far right at the moment is on 35% going into that first round in the polls, and the left-wing alliance on 29%, and President Macron's centrists on 20%. So you can see the scale of the lead in the French opinion polls.
One bit of stability, Sam. Ursula von der Leyen appears to be on course to be re-elected as the European Commission president following a meeting in Brussels last night. So there's at least somebody who's sort of, more familiar face to British politicians who appears to be on course for another long term. There'll be something for them to cling to there.
One oasis of stability in a changing world. Lots of change next week. Let's see what happens then.
And excitingly, Sam, I've had a text message from Labour saying Keir Starmer is out and about today. He's doing a Radio 5 phone-in and he's visiting North West and will be talking to Hack. So don't worry, Keir Starmer apparently is going to be not neglecting us this weekend.
Crowbarred that in just in time before we bring down the curtain crashing on another week of this podcast. We will be back on Monday morning for the final few days of the election week next week. You're not going to want to miss a single episode of Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily. See you then.
Rest up, Sam, and see you then. Cheers.